Hi everyone, welcome to episode 61 of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. Thank you for tuning in again. It's been a little while since the last time I posted. I was trying to do a weekly program and I did that for a long time, but this month just hit me really hard and I had too much work to do, and I honestly couldn't justify doing the podcast with the amount of work I had. If my clients saw that I was taking the time out to do videos while their cases were pending and none of them were going any longer than they normally would, but I didn't want to have any delay in any way on cases because that was just really packed. So I had to put that aside. It requires a certain amount of energy and time personally to do these two, so it was very difficult this month. So I'm kind of going to be thinking about shifting how I actually do the program. To be honest, the weekly format where I started with the news and then practice stuff was cool, but I was getting kind of stale. I'm going to experiment with different ways of doing this. If I had a lot of time, I'd have a news one, and then one about practice experience, then one about like technical aspects of the law, then one about interviewing people, all of these kind of different things, but unfortunately it's not happening. One thing I've talked about a lot on the program is how to decide and when to know to get somebody to help in the office, and how I was pushing back against that. Well, I found the real answer to when you should hire somebody and bring them on board, and it's when you absolutely need to, and you'll definitely feel it, which I felt this month that I just needed a helping hand, or else this train wouldn't keep going. It would probably get derailed. So I was able to bring someone a few hours a week, not too heavy, but just to deal with non-law stuff, non-direct client stuff, but just behind the scenes stuff that I need to do to keep the office going and functioning in the way I want, and it helped out a lot. But it was a tough month just because of the sheer volume. So things have been going well, as you can tell. A lot of clients asking for my help, and a lot of people coming for consultations. And one thing I had to do was somewhat increase the prices, especially for consultations, just because I couldn't handle the volume that was coming in. I had to develop some sort of method to thin it out so I could give my attention to those who really want to work with me and then make the decision, other than just people who are looking around. I usually try to not deal with those people either, but it's getting more strict on how I do that. It was a crazy time to take a break too, because it just every day there's something new in immigration law. We're really at the forefront as immigration practitioners of the law in society, and law in public image, in the public sphere, and in media, because every day there's something crazy, literally crazy, going on with regards to immigration. Just now there's news reports and these videos of a young girl who's sick in bed at 10, and they took her away at the hospital to set up deportation, all that kind of stuff. That was incredible. ICE is coming down hard, saying they're going to go and arrest people, taking people that don't have criminal history, the people you wouldn't expect to get picked up for removal, and them doubling down on how strict they want to be, saying it brazenly and openly. And California is pushing back, having laws against these kind of illegal searches and seizures, Fourth Amendment issues. But there's another video on the internet going around where ICE just barged into a house, complete disregard for the Constitution, to go pick up somebody with no authority and no warrant, and trespassing, breaking the constitutional law, the basics of our country. So it's a crazy time. But that's the kind of work we do. Now, I don't necessarily handle removal as much, but because I don't do that kind of work, I like to at least talk about it here so I could help other practitioners with some bits of information, because at least I can help in that way, because I don't do litigation type cases or deal with the humanitarian type cases. Without further ado, let's get it started so we can go today talk about some practice pointers. Thanks again for listening. Again, thanks also to the people who reached out when I was disappeared for a month. To a dear listener, Lorenz, for contacting me, say how you are, and several other people who followed up. It's so good we have a community, and that you could be there for me, just as I try to be there as much as I can for you guys when you email me as well. So without further ado, let's get it started. Welcome to the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I am the host, Attorney John Khosravi, and I practice U.S. immigration law exclusively. For more information about the program, please visit www.immigrationlawyerspodcast.com. Please note that this recording is informational only and does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with a licensed attorney for specific legal guidance that suits your case. Also, this recording is copyrighted, and written permission is required for rebroadcasting. For more information about me, please visit www.jqklaw.com. So today I'm not going to do the typical starting with the news stuff. Frankly, because a lot of news is depressing. I feel like I'm just kind of forcing it. What I really originally started this podcast was for talking about immigration stuff. And if you look at the original episodes, those interviews, my goal was to talk about immigration, practical stuff, the stuff we see as practitioners on a daily basis with each other, and like talk about war stories. And I wanted to have a way I could talk to other practitioners where I don't know, but I'll kind of get them in through the podcast to talk to them about it, and then go into details on this. And it was kind of hard because a lot of it is confidential information, and it's stuff we talk about when we have our mixers, if we're having lunch together or something like that. But it's kind of hard to do in a public venue. But those are stuff I like talking about the most because it's so interesting. For example, I have one consultation coming up, and I posted this on a Facebook listserv for immigration attorneys, and it got a huge response, and a lot of attorneys were just excited to think about the complicated issues we have, where it's a person that is potentially planning on coming to the U.S. For a request that was made by a U.S. person for their eggs. So it's a reproductive issue. They'll come here, give their eggs to the fertility clinic so this family could get it and they could start their family. Is that unlawful employment in the U.S. or is it not unlawful employment? And that's the question that came up. And so it's just so interesting. There's just so many different ways this could come to play. And in the Foreign Affairs manuals, nothing fits that exact scenario. And in practice, like what is it, what is not? Is it work? Is it not work? Is it what's the intent on coming in? Is it proper? All this kind of stuff. So that was just interesting how it came up. It was a long discussion of just breaking down what is the activity they're doing. Is it work? Is it labor? Is it employment? And there's other level stuff which is not what we do, but accounting of how does the accounting factor into that? Is that a sale? Is that 1099 independent contractor pay? Like how does that all work out? So the modern era, egg fertility stuff is going on for decades, not too modern, but especially when you see with the internet, I've had clients who are YouTube stars coming to the U.S. and I had one that was before they came to me, it turned back from the border because they came on a B1, B2, and they asked what do you do? I'm a YouTube star. And they have camera following them, and they said, the CBP said, no, you have a camera following you, you're going to get paid through YouTube ads. The U.S. company is going to send you money for recordings you're doing while you're walking around the street and talking to the camera. That's a violation. You need to get an O1 or something like that to get it. So a lot of these new things come about which don't fit exactly in the way the laws and the rules for B1, B2s are set out. And frankly, it's always been the case. There are these gray areas that are difficult, and it's up to us kind of to interpret these things. But at the other side of it, CBP officer or the embassy officer, they can interpret the way they want to, and still could be a problem. So it's a very complicated, complex process that constantly pops up, but it keeps it interesting. Just very time consuming to do the research and to figure out these things. So that's why you gotta set aside time where you can't handle it, because that's not necessarily something you can hand off to a secretary to do. That's full on legal work to figure out the answer to that. Another case that came in, and it was a very sad story. And I'm going to talk about cases if you want to listen to this stuff. But so it's a woman who, foreign national from Iran, marries a U.S. citizen, comes to the U.S. So U.S. citizen obviously has a passport, lawful is a citizen, and she's a green card holder. She has 2 children from a previous marriage, both of them under 16. A daughter that's like 12, son that's 15 or something like that. She applies for them. Now she does the I-130 petition for a relative on her own. She files for the children, F2A category, children of lawful permanent residents. The daughter, so they have to wait the 2 years. Daughter turns 16, comes, gets a green card, no problem. The son waits 2 years. By the time comes up for the visa chart, the visa bulletin, priority date comes up, the son's over 16. They're from Iran, so they have forced conscription there in the military. And what they do is at the age of 16, they take away their passport and don't give a passport to them, so they can't leave the country. They're stuck there. Because they're waiting for the visa bulletin to become current, kid's stuck there, 16. So finishes high school, is 18, has to go 2 years of military service. Poor kid's father, the natural father, gets cancer, so instead of doing 2 years military service, they have to do it on a part-time basis, drags out to 4 years. So all of a sudden, kid waits from 16 to 18 to go to military conscription, 18 to 22 to finish it, and now wants to come and do consular processing to come to the U.S. Lady pays for a first attorney, guy sucks, doesn't do anything. Goes to a second one, pays it. Essentially, she does all the work. the National Visa Center RFEs on things like they didn't send a passport to the National Visa Center. They didn't send a copy of the military certificate, the completion certificate. Just really basic stuff. She did her own DS-260, which had errors in it, and the attorney didn't review. It was ridiculous and charged regular prices that I would have charged. It's very sad. So what happened is once the travel ban hit, which is, they're not talking about it, and that's another reason I didn't do videos at a really important time when this new travel ban came about. But the lawyer said, oh, travel ban's here, your son can never come to the U.S. anymore. I'm dropping the case, you're not my client anymore because of the travel ban. Well, as you all know, travel ban was hit down. Second of all, there's waivers in these kind of situations, and explain that hardship, they might grant it. You know, this child of a lawful permanent resident who's a citizen now, a stepfather is a citizen, sister's a citizen, all this issue of unnecessarily waiting for the visa available. I think embassy officers would be sympathetic to that. So that's something I would go, but I can't believe this attorney dumped them. And she contacted me, came to my office, I explained this all. And the saddest part about this is this, and you might have caught it already if you're a practitioner listening to this. She filed for the I-130 F2A category as lawful permanent resident for the son, had to wait the 2 years for the visa bulletin to become current. But a stepson of a U.S. citizen could have filed, or the stepfather could have filed an I-130 as an immediate relative and got that all done within a year, beating the time that the conscription service and the passport situation would have popped up. Potentially there would have been issues for the passport not being valid for more than 6 months, this and that, but the embassy would probably work with them on that. And since they're under the age of 18, administrative processing probably wouldn't have happened at that age. So they would have rushed that one into the U.S., maybe you could have asked for expedited processing because of the time constraints and everything like that, and really solve this whole family situation. So she unfortunately got hit really hard for not getting a lawyer at the beginning, which messed up things, and then she got lawyers that sucked, which would drag things on even longer than they should have, bring it into this territory where this travel ban came into play, stopped now, but it could come into play once again. So now I'm helping them, but at this point, it's just a matter of hit this and that to get it done. All the dirty work is done. So it was a sad situation, but it was really interesting to see how this is when they say like, oh, what does immigration do? They just fill out some forms. Just knowing the complications of an immediate relative versus an F2A preference category itself is really important. Knowing what documents to send the government, filling out the DS-260 is way unnecessarily complicated for people. Although this is stuff supposed to be people can handle themselves, the DS-260 is just way too complicated. Questions come that are weird. Their documents sometimes have issues, misspellings that they don't catch on their own, which is our job to do. And so that's that. Now, moving on from that, speaking of embassy officers being sympathetic, I really think embassy officers are sympathetic in the age of Trump to helping people because they realize the disturbances these kind of things do in people's lives. I really have to do a shout out to the embassy in Ankara, Turkey. I wanted to email that, keep putting it off to thank him. I have a client, she hit mother of a U.S. citizen, hit the administrative processing after her interview. A year and a half go by, we haven't heard anything. Client, the petitioner, was about to file a writ of mandamus. A month before that, another one of my cases was hitting the year and a half mark of administrative processing, got an interview notice, which is actually tomorrow they're going for their embassy interview, October 31st, actually 2 days from now. I'm filming this on the 29th. And I said, listen, my other client who went to interview a month before you just got their second interview to get the process going to get the immigrant visa. Let's wait another month, see what happens. Then the travel ban hit, we're like, oh man, even if they do give the interview, there's a travel ban, this and that. So what the embassy did is, I think the travel ban was like going to kick in on a Wednesday. They called them on a Friday in the home country, in one of those 7 countries, said, come to the embassy in Ankara on Monday, we'll do the interview, get your medical as fast as possible because they have to redo the medical, and then they issued a visa a day later before the travel ban. Now, the travel ban was lifted, so they're saved on that end anyways, but the embassy in Ankara really went out of their way to rush this because they realized this was like a 7-year-old woman, homemaker, like there's no reason for the administrative processing, frankly. And so, but I think administrative processing is outside the hands of consular officials. So they realized like we gotta like get this going. Her police report and background checks for administration was done. She's gonna get hit by the travel ban. Let's just process it. And I think they're working overtime to do these things, calling up and setting it up. So a big shout out. I think they appreciate the difficulties these political things like the travel ban. It really is a political thing. Hits families and separates them and creates huge difficulties for them. They're able to get that done and come to the U.S. quickly. So a big shout out. But that's again showing like these embassy officers, Sometimes, you get frustrated with how things work, and you're like, who are these people? But there's both sides of the coin. We now have listeners. I've been contacted by embassy officers who do listen to the show, and they're very great, and they agree with a lot of these things. But at the end of the day, they work for the government. That's their employer. They have to execute their policies, whether they like it or not. Best thing we do is just work with them, be polite, and just keep the process going. Because just like our job changes every day because of the way the rules change every day, and like the personalities change in the process, theirs is the same. And to be frank, I don't think diplomatic or embassy officers necessarily join the diplomatic corps to go and grant visas. There's this excitement and adventurism when you join the State Department that you're going to go on a far-off land and do diplomacy and see all these crazy things. And then all of a sudden, like, you're sitting there stamping B1, B2 visas all day. It probably takes the joy out of it, especially when you're dealing with all sorts of personalities. The people are nervous and they get angry. I've had clients who come to me after the fact, and not my clients, they come after the fact, they're denied to call me. And they're like, oh yeah, we yelled at them, we told them they're an idiot, like, how dare you do this, you know who I am, all this kind of stuff. And that was like, you didn't need to yell at them like that. It wasn't necessary. If anything, that didn't help your case. I have one client, we were trying to set up an L1, get the process started, and he got denied his tourist visa to come and visit. And he wrote letters to the embassy, to the president, and emailed everybody yelling at them, like, how dare you, I'm coming to invest, like all this angry stuff. And I'm like, dude, that didn't help your case. It wasn't necessary. Just, you should have contacted me before you requested the B1, B2. Because he did it on his own without telling me. I'm like, I would have talked to you what you need to do. It would have saved that hassle of doing that. At the very least, there's no point in causing this kind of stuff in the record of you being an outburst like that. So it's just what happens with people. Moving on, I've been doing a lot of marriage cases. I think like 3 or 4 months ago, I got a huge sum of, like, bunch of them, and the interviews are coming up now. So a couple notes. One is EADs were not happening. Like, literally, we'd get the green cards and the EADs would never arrive, or they would arrive like 2 days before the actual green card interview. This is in Los Angeles. So Los Angeles is a wonderful place to do a marriage green card application because they're getting done in 3 or 4 months at times. In LA City, I can't say the same for Orange County or La Valley. We have this big district called District 23, which after New York is probably the second biggest. It battles probably for second place with some other jurisdictions. But in the downtown LA office where they deal with that, they're really quick. And so it comes up much faster than EAD. Traditionally, EAD really should come out for 2 months, so it holds you over. But the EADs now in October are starting to come a little faster. People are starting getting it back to the timelines they used to get last year. So that's a little bit of good news that's coming around. On the other side, in the interviews now, I mean, I've gone to so many interviews historically where we just sit there and they ask a couple questions and we leave. Now they are taking notes. They're literally asking questions and then writing down verbatim what the people are saying, even really mundane stuff, and just taking notes throughout it. So it takes longer, like an hour of just them talking and then taking notes. This is consistently happening with officers, so I think there's a push to document the interview much more than they used to, whereas sometimes they'll just really go in there, sometimes they wouldn't even ask a single question, or they'll just hang out, talk, joke around, and get proved the case. Now it's much more stringent. Now, all my cases are good, everything's going to work out. They weren't tough, like they were just trying to grill them, because frankly we prepared the case. There's so much documentation, and the couple was prepared. It's a real thing, so it's nothing to worry about. But they are taking hardcore notes. That's something I've noticed. I'm not sure if your districts are doing the same, but in LA they're doing a lot of that. Going back to Turkey, one dramatic thing that happened is because of political disturbances between Turkey and the U.S. announced that it doesn't feel that Turkey is doing enough to protect its embassy personnel in that country, so they shut down non-immigrant visa processing for the time being. It's been a month now. This is something important I want to talk about because this affects a lot of my cases because I do a lot of consular processing in that jurisdiction. I do non-immigrant visas, so that's not affected in Ankara. But like for example in Istanbul, you can't get a tourist visa. So I know people who've been doing E2s there. All of a sudden they paid the filing fee, they sent the case to E2 there for initial review by the embassy and the consulate, but they've been stopped because they can't process that anymore. So they have to switch off and go to different embassies. It's a dramatic situation that's happening. It's not clear when it's going to open up. And I already had a couple of DS-160s for some tourist visas some clients wanted processing there. I hadn't paid the fee yet. I was in the middle of it, so I have to stop. And I'm like, the clients prefer to go to Turkey to do that. So I'm like, should I wait it out? Because it's easier for them. They have family and relatives in Turkey, so it's cheaper for them to go and visit there. Plane tickets are less expensive. It just works out better for them. Or should I have them go to another place? The reason why I do like processing in Turkey is because the embassy is more responsive to emails. Even if they don't have an answer, at least they'll answer you to say, we don't have an answer. Whereas if I'm working with some other embassies, example in the UAE, that's not as easy to get a response from the embassy and not as easy to contact them. They kind of hide away. So that's just a troublesome issue. Now, there have been a lot of violent acts happening from the U.S. embassy over there. I had a client who was, let's see, this was like 6 or 7 years ago, back when I did, or maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I did asylum cases. And this woman went with another person. I can't get too much details of it, but they're really valid asylum cases. People that like didn't want to leave the home country, but had to. How should I put this? Anyways, they went to get tourist visas to come here. Eventually filed for asylum. These two different people in the same line of work. Both were medical doctors. Had no intent to really escape their country, but they had to get out because of extenuating circumstances. And now they have green cards. By now they have citizenship, I think. But they both went in for interview. One of them left, which was my client. The second one, when they left, was assassinated by a gunshot right there, right in front of the door of the embassy. And so, like, it's crazy what kind of things could go down. This is a dangerous zone. When you go to U.S. embassy in a foreign place, you really are going to a dangerous area. It's like going to a bad area of town. Even though they have security there, it might be a nice area of town, because of the profile of the U.S. embassy and all that goes wrong with that, all the animosity and anger that exists because of U.S. activities internationally. It's such a risky place to go and visit, and you have to be on guard. And that's why security procedures are so strict at the embassy. But once you step outside the gate, you're in the public. And so it's up to that country, that home country, the host country, to be able to provide security. And in Turkey, it's very difficult. They have terrorist attacks there. There's wars going on with the neighbors. People are rushing in. Their own security situation is difficult. For God's sakes, they had a coup that almost happened to overthrow the government there. So it's a precarious position. Turkey's still a safe place, and tourism is there, all that kind of stuff. But it's wild when the U.S. just says, no, we're not going to do non-immigrant visas from this country. Now, the U.S. has also shut down processing in Cuba as well because of the effects I talked about in a previous podcast. That's happening with some sort of sonic attacks allegedly that are affecting their embassy employees there, which have them shut down. So it's a wild time. It's wild times when these kind of things happen. Hopefully, peace will prevail and sanity will come back in, and people will just live their lives and do these sort of migrations that are part of human nature, have happened historically since time memorial. Now, I did talk about how much more interviews I'm going with my clients. This is a really important topic for practitioners that do family-based immigration proceedings. Going to interview is a very time-consuming process. First of all, you got to drive all the way over there. It could be traffic. That's going to take time. You sign in. It might be 30 minutes, might be 2 hours before they actually see you. And then when you go in, the interview could be 20 minutes or it could be an hour. Then you got to finish it up, come back to the office, come back home. And there's many hours that go into that. And then I have a preparatory session beforehand. Some clients I could get done in 45 minutes, an hour in the prep session because they're on top of it. Some clients might take 2.5 hours of stuff. So all of a sudden, when you take the interview process of the marriage case, it could easily be more than 5 hours of work. Now, once we go in there, especially with the preparation I do, there are times when it'll seem like my being there was not necessary at all. So that makes it difficult how to charge for a situation like this, because 5-6 hours of work is a lot of work. That's a whole day of legal work right there that I'm spending on somebody, where when they go to see the fruits of my legal work, it seemed like it wasn't necessary. Now there are times, frankly, in marriage cases where attorney isn't necessary, but when I start a case, I like to see it from the beginning to end. I don't make it mandatory for my clients to pay for a session of preparation and going to interview. In my contracts, I separate that out. I say when the interview is scheduled, think about it, we'll look at the situation, what's going on, and you can make a decision whether you want to do that or not, unless the people have certain issues like criminal history or a weird marriage history or bad documentation, or the people are really nervous or abrasive or don't speak English well. Different kind of things that could create problems for the interview. I say it's really important I go there for those. But I give that option open. Most people do it. But I do kind of discount it because I know once we go in there, especially with the preparation we do, it's going to look like I didn't do anything. Now, they don't necessarily, clients appreciate it. I've never had someone push back on it, but some people might say, oh, you're just sitting in the back not doing anything. Where having an attorney in the room has its own effect. It holds the officer to a higher standard. They know there's a witness there. Clients are less nervous because they know I'm there. I'm sitting in the back taking notes. That has its own psychological effect. And plus, the prep session beforehand helps them remember what they're supposed to remember. A lot of times when I ask clients, what's your spouse's phone number? Because nowadays everyone's on the cell phone. They don't, on the speed dial on the cell phone, they don't know it. But just by bringing it up once, or bringing it up, like, what is your wife's birthday? What is your marriage date? What date did you last enter the United States? Clients always forget because they don't think about it. So by having a prep session, it brings that to mind for them to know it, hear it once out loud, and to be prepared for what kind of questions are going to come up during the interview. So with all these interviews I've been doing, that's one of the reasons why I haven't had time to do these podcasts, which I really enjoy these multimedia stuff I do and reaching out to members and doing AILA stuff because it's just so fun for me to practice immigration law and the people involved. But when you're go at a 9 o'clock interview, you gotta wake up early, come back, then you have phone calls answered. By the time it's evening, I'm too tired to do a video for marketing or do a podcast or go to an AILA event or do some legal writing and research for myself. And so it's what do I do? How do I balance this out, which is difficult? Because honestly, I should charge more than what I do, but at the same time, I know it might offend clients if they see, because they're not going to appreciate what's actually happening. Now, there was a video I saw on YouTube where one immigration lawyer says, don't bring a lawyer. It looks suspicious if you bring a lawyer. I'm definitely against that. It's not suspicious at all, in my opinion, to have a lawyer with you. If an officer rarely says something like that, they just don't know what they're doing. Having an attorney there, having an attorney whenever you're dealing with the government in any situation is necessary. Now, even in a traffic ticket, let's say you're speeding, if it was possible to have a lawyer there with you when you're talking to that police officer, that should happen. The problem is it's not feasible because the ticket pops up out of nowhere and it's too expensive to have a lawyer right there to help you with the police officer. But anything more than that, so that's just a little bit more than that. It's always good to have a lawyer with you whenever you're dealing with the strict force and power of the state coming against you. Having a lawyer is key. Now, when you come to civil kind of situations too, and immigration is considered civil, but it's a state that's going to grant the benefit, the federal government in particular. So it's just mandatory. But even a civil situation is always good. Because people say the most ridiculous things. Have an attorney telling you that quiet down, don't say these ridiculous things, or don't do that kind of slander. All this kind of stuff is really important. So that's just my thing. How do you guys deal with that going to the interview? I know some lawyers have their associates go, but I like to go myself because I have that relationship. The only solution is to charge more, but I don't want to put off people, but sometimes you just got to do it because there's a deep service I'm providing, there's a relationship I'm building, and that's that. I don't know, but I just want to bring it up because y'all probably have the same kind of issues come up from time to time. I want to see if it's if it affects you. Moving on, this is more into new stuff that's kind of crazy. And I use the word crazy a lot, and sometimes, especially when I'm talking to older people, when they say, why does you guys say crazy? And the definition of the word crazy kind of means lunatic, but I mean just wild and unbelievable. I should say it like that. There was some sort of statistic that came out that 1 in 5 person in the U.S. is an immigrant or immigrant related, pretty much like a foreigner, and that's a huge growth in the percentage of people. And some of the groups that are anti-immigration took that number and ran with it of what's going on with the country, like we're not speaking in language. And I partially understand. I believe that having a single language, English in particular, obviously, is really important for people to be able to communicate well. Peace will come about if people are able to communicate well on the same basis. So first learning the language, then learning it well enough to speak it and to be able to think in it. This is a really interesting thing, and it's a side note, is they used to think people that were who couldn't hear and see and couldn't speak because of that, they call them deaf and dumb. And because they just look dumb because the way they act and stuff like that. And then they studied this and they realized the reason why people that are deaf and can't speak, and I guess blind as well, come off as dumb is because they never learned language, which are words that put together, and those words on their own are the tools that the brain needs to be able to think properly, to develop thought and take it to the next level. So if these people that were deaf or couldn't speak, if they learned a language, even sign language or some sort of picture language, that would give them the tools for their brains to be able to think and put it together and be able to, be a regular human being that could function in a mature adult fashion and have a normal life. And then it just shows how important it has to have the building blocks to be able to speak and think correctly and properly at a higher level, to be able to communicate and increase the value of your life and joy you have in it. And that's one of the key things we learn in law school, is not how to actually be lawyers, because no one learns how to practice law in law school. They know how to think like a lawyer, and that's the IRAC method, how to spot an issue, see what the rule is, analyze it properly to come to a conclusion, which is lost on the most of the population, where it's all reactionary. If you watch these shows, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, whatever these garbage channels say, they always ask, an event pops up in society, and they ask, how do you feel about that? Which is a quick reaction. There's no thought. Taking those words in, churning in your head, and they don't say, what do you think about this? How do you feel about that? And so that's why it's so important that the words be there, the communication be there, be able to speak to bring the society together and keep everyone on the same page. Because frankly, if you're coming up in a group where English is your second language, it makes it very difficult to function and to make more money in society, to have a position of more influence. But it's not that I'm against not speaking a second language. Frankly, I speak Farsi and Persian at home. I really enjoy the language. It's a very fun language to speak. I think, honestly, one of the saddest things I really think about, and I guess if you speak Farsi and you appreciate languages, that so many people in the world don't know how to speak Persian or Farsi, because it's such a sweet language to speak. It just rolls off your tongue if you speak it right. To the non-Persian ear, it probably comes up as people using the kh sound, all this kind of stuff. But if spoken properly, using proper words, proper language, it's a very beautiful, poetic language. It's a wonderful thing. But at the same time, as you can tell in this podcast, that English is the language of my business. It's a language I think when I'm doing higher thoughts and analyzing stuff in my own head too. So going back to where this all came about is that the bad part that a lot of the anti-immigration groups saying, the language, foreigners aren't speaking English, this is bad, this and that. But I remember seeing a documentary on Dean Martin. Dean Martin was a famous singer-actor from back in the day with the Rat Pack and all of that. They were saying Dean Martin, he grew up in an Italian family, didn't speak English or learn how to speak English until he was 6 or 7 or 8 when he started going to school. His family only spoke Italian in the house. And now Dean Martin is the icon of an American figure, this and that. And so just by that idea that someone at home doesn't speak that language, it's not as bad. Honestly, frankly, in LA, I have clients, especially when I used to do deferred action, that happened. I would have clients that would come, a young person, let's say 18, 19, they would come with their parents to do deferred action, and I would speak to the client, and the child who was raised here for deferred action had more of an accent than the parents did. The parents were almost American, and the child had a worse accent. And I realized in their neighborhoods, and it's not just Hispanic communities, there's in Beverly Hills even, there's families there that I think the kid has been he was born and raised in the U.S., never lived outside the country, but has such a thick accent, it looks like they just came fresh off the boat, if you will. So it's an amazing thing. It happens both ways, but I think it's not good. Being able to speak the language properly is really important. It's kind of jumping on different tangents when I'm talking about that, but these groups are pushing back, and my point was it isn't necessarily a bad thing that you have a foreign community that speaks their own language. They will adjust and learn the English language. It's just a matter of sending importance. And one thing the other side pushes a lot is being respectful, which is being respectful is important, but saying no, it's okay for someone to not learn the main language. And it's a controversial subject, but I think for communication purposes, and that's what the build-up was, it's really important that we learn the language, but at the same time let people speak their second languages too. I think it adds to what we have here. So it's a little bit of both. So it affects people in an immigration community and what we do, because our clients deal with these issues. I myself don't take on, majority of the time, cases where I can't speak directly with my client, because if I can't do full communication, I might miss an important piece of information that could affect their consular processing, that could affect their adjustment interview because they didn't tell me. So I do say, try to find an attorney that speaks your home language, and sometimes that offends them because they don't understand why I say that, what the need for that is. But I find it really important to do. Unfortunately, I don't always know people I could recommend who speak that language, so chances are they're going to go a lawyer, especially, unfortunately, ethnic attorneys take advantage, immigration attorneys. I've seen a lot of that, taking advantage of people in their own community. I have a client right now who's Chinese, who went to a Chinese accountant, a Chinese immigration attorney. Immigration attorney failed the case, and we're rushing to fix it right now, which is one of the reasons I can't do podcasts and all the marketing media stuff I want to do. And then the accountant was giving them nonsense that if you get this non-immigrant visa and you're here for 2-3 years, you don't have to pay U.S. taxes because you're a foreign national. All this kind of garbage. And I'm like, no, just go to some good people. Don't base it on them being able to speak your home language or from your home country, because it has no measurement of how good they are, how much you could trust them. Moving on, that term chain migration is being pushed once again. I talked about this in the previous podcast, I think the last one, but it's this psychological term they're really pushing when it comes to family-based categories, chain migration. For example, you know, we have an H-1B person gets a green card, they get citizenship, brings a spouse, and then the spouse, and then they bring their parents, and then they bring their brothers and sisters, all that, and then those brothers and sisters bring their spouses and children, all this kind of stuff, and that rolls a chain along. It's debatable, like, how these numbers affect people. It is large amounts of people that are coming, but the term chain migration, there's got to have been a think tank that sat down and thought about that, because I would never hear that term, but it's so visually perfect. Chain migration. It's very damaging to family-based immigration, because it can really sit into the hearts and minds of people, especially on people who are already anti-immigration, but it's easy for people that were on the fence to absorb that language. So that's something to be very mindful of in the news and see how it's used, the term chain migration. I find these things fascinating, how they come up with this. For example, there was, in the Bush time, the inheritance tax was turned into the death tax, and that pushed a lot of public pressure to get rid of it or to challenge the inheritance tax. I'm not making a pro or con statement on what the inheritance tax is, but it's just fascinating how these psychological terminology of these words affect people, and chain migration is one of those very damaging words. It's very powerful to use to help undo a lot of the Immigration Nationality Act and how it works with preference categories, and frankly immediate relative categories with the RAISE Act, which is this guy's just amazing. Senator Cotton is pushing to get rid of a lot of the family-based categories. Moving on, a quick note. If your client, their green card is lost or something like that, and you get a wet green card stamp in their passport, be mindful of two things. One is which airline they're boarding to use that, and which country they're going to be in transit when using that. Because some countries and some airlines won't accept that. I think Great Britain, England, you can't use a wet green card stamp. They won't allow you to transit through it, even though it's lawful, even though CBP completely accepts it. They might not. Some airlines also won't accept it because they don't understand it. Now you could challenge them, have them call CBP and coordinate it, but just be mindful. If you have clients that have this, ask them which airline they're looking in and go to the website for that airline to double check, and double check which countries won't accept it as well, to avoid the hassle of them flying over that place to figure out that it's not going to work, or paying for a ticket, showing up and realizing that it's not going to work. Now I'm going to end today's podcast with what's happening with USCIS, which is a new, I think it's director, I can't remember what the exact title they uses, but a new person was chosen and appointed and passed the Senate to be the head of USCIS. I think the person's name is like Lee Francis Cessna or something like that. Immediately upon becoming the head, a memo came out that when it comes to non-immigrant visa categories that are getting extensions like L1s, H1Bs, instead of getting deference to the previous application when reviewing it, they're going to review it totally from new, de novo review, which is very interesting. This shows which direction they're going. Very damaging, very damning, and very suspicious of these applications going forward, and that's the first memo this person put out. It's kind of clear where they stand on these things. Now, I was going to do a full podcast about this person's background, personalities, policies, and stuff like that, but fortunately not going to be able to do that. But another quick thing is right before this person was appointed in this position, USCIS did a list, and they announced it and they sent it out, where they list all the companies that have L1s and how many L1s they had. This was like a secret piece of information that I always wanted to know, because I want to see the numbers and how many are doing it, how many companies have it, and it was interesting seeing my own clients on the list, which I prefer not to, but I guess it's public information. But you could tell what direction they're going with this transparency, which is not bad necessarily, but they're intentionally doing this to out these groups. And frankly, it's dangerous because in one sense they're painting these people, for example, doing an L1, which is like an excellent kind of visa, a perfect one for the U.S. when it comes to bringing investors here, creating jobs, increasing the tax base, all around win, home run. Once you put their name on lists and you allow these crazy people that hate immigrants to find this list and to like go after their businesses, potentially send them hate mail, all this kind of stuff, it's not appropriate. it's a very dangerous thing to do. And again, it sets a tone of what direction everything is going. The travel ban and consular processing issues on the outside of the U.S., internally ICE doing raids. And when Trump came first and he was trying to do this stuff, it was really like not well thought out. And I thought, okay, he's just doing this stuff nominally, they're not going to go anywhere. Because, for example, the first travel ban was so badly written, I told myself, like, they're probably just doing it for show, because it was obvious that one wasn't going to pass muster. And it was written like a drunk wrote the darn thing, travel ban #1. So I'm like, okay, not very serious, they're just doing these things as an act. But now they got it together where they're pushing back on the little things that they can that'll disrupt the system. To say, we're not going to give deference on an L1, we're going to release this list. The other thing that they did, having interviews for all employment-based categories. Well, what's that going to do? All of a sudden, there's so many more interviews that have to happen, that's going to delay processing for all the other ones. So they're going to, at least in one way, instead of changing the law to stop immigration, they're going to slow down the process more and more, so much that artificially causes a drop and slowdown in the system for new immigrants coming to the U.S., both non-immigrant visa categories and immigrant visa categories. So they're getting what their goals are in a much smarter way. So it's obvious the people running the anti-immigration units within the administration are actually doing their homework. They're people that have been in the process, either USCIS or private practitioners, or they understand the nitty-gritty basics of the bureaucracy that we deal with every day, and what parts of that bureaucracy they could pinch and hold and put a wall in to slow everything down that's legal, and there's nothing anyone can do about because it's administrative, but gets at the end of the day to what their intents and goals are. So it's a fascinating time to be an immigration lawyer, to deal with all this. On one hand, it increases immigration work regardless of what happens, unless they straight up just stop a category. All these difficulties they bring, it creates more work, but frankly, it's not the kind of work I want. I don't want people to pay me to do busy work that's difficult for them, going to make it harder. For example, the waivers that come with the consular processing, both the travel ban waivers, I was not very delighted to do because it's necessarily hard. I don't know what the results are going to be. But frankly, when it comes to irregular immigrant waivers, I always had a hard time because they're so time consuming. You have to pay charge a lot of money for the amount of hours I'm going to put into it. And that's why usually I don't do waiver cases unless I really like the clients, or they're already a client, or there's certain issues and situations that make me want to do it. But waivers are just so time consuming, and sometimes really the reason that created the purpose, what initiated the need for the waiver sometimes is so minuscule or so unnecessary that it's frustrating that the people have to go through that just to be able to set themselves up. But we'll see what happens. I still do love what I do. It's such a fascinating field, and everyone who really is an immigration attorney, and we see in my the Facebook pages that we Immigration Talk and the listservs and all that, we're really on the front line of changing law and experiences in the U.S. And that's what makes it so sweet. Thank you for listening to another podcast. Trying to figure out new systems to organize this podcast, get it out. But thank you for all those that are listening. It's a large group, several hundred people. And reach out to me, please. I'd like to get to know you. My email is info@jqqlaw.com. It's always a pleasure when you do contact me and you develop relationships. If you're ever in Los Angeles, hit me up. Would love to grab some coffee. And let me know where you are, because I travel frequently. And when I'm in Seattle or DC or New York, I'd love to come and have some tea or some coffee with you. My name is John Khosravi. This was the Immigration Lawyers Podcast, episode 61. Have a happy Halloween, a safe one, and I'll see you in November. Bye-bye.